Hello and welcome to the Think Aorta Podcast. My name is Simon Rose. I'm a lecturer at the University of East Anglia, and today I'm joined by two very special guests. I've got Gareth and Lindsey. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I must say it's great to have you here, and I just want to thank you straight from the off. Lindsey, you've come all the way from Canada, so a hell of a journey, obviously via Yorkshire. And Gareth, obviously, you've come from Yorkshire as well, just to record the podcast today. So, I mean, you're probably losing the mileage race with Lindsey, I must say, but you've done a massive undertaking to get to Norwich today. So, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, what I want to do really is start off just by getting a bit of your backgrounds for the audience, so those who might be new to the podcast. So, Gareth, could we start with you?
By all means, yeah. My name's Gareth Owens. I'm a Welshman. I have Marfan Syndrome, which is a genetic aortic disorder. And I worked in IT, in pharmaceuticals and in healthcare for the best part of 30 years. And until the age of 50, I had an acute aortic dissection, which kind of changed my life, and we can talk about that a bit later. These days, I'm chair of the national patient charity Aortic Dissection Awareness UK and Ireland. And I lead the global Think Aorta campaign. So
it sounds like you're not really slowed down too much then compared to pre-dissection.
I think it's just different.
Yeah.
I've certainly found a purpose that I never had when I was just working to make money for people in the city.
Yeah.
So it's different. And as a patient, yeah, you do have to slow down and you do have to realize that some days you can't do much. And the beauty of what I do now as a volunteer is I'm flexible. I can do what I'm able to when I'm able, and I can leave it if I'm sick or if I'm preparing for an operation or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gareth. Lindsey, over to you.
Well, my name's Lindsey Roosh. I am a Canadian. I'm also British. I was born in England and lived here till I was 10, but then obviously emigrated to Canada and have lived there for 40 years, not 50 years. I also have Marfan Syndrome, and I would have been diagnosed actually at 9 in England. And I live in England, live in Canada. And I'm also the president of a charity in Canada called the Genetic Aortic Disorders Association, which represents people with aortic diseases related to genetics or familial causes.
So you both got quite a lot on the plate then, being obviously leading organisations.
Absolutely. But it's good. It's actually patient advocacy and getting to do this as a patient at this point in my life especially, and I'm sure Gareth feels the same way, that it's not just about giving you purpose, it's also doing something that helps people like us. And, 40, 50 years ago when we were young children, there was not a lot of information and there was not a lot of support. So it's amazing to be able to provide that to other people.
Yeah.
I think there's an interesting thing has happened in the last 10 years, Simon. So, historically, the old thinking about aortic dissection in the medical community was that nobody survived, and that even if you did the right thing for these patients, they didn't have a good outcome. And with 21st century medicine and surgery, that's completely changed. And so there is a growing number of people who are now surviving and living into older ages with this disease. But what's really encouraging to me in the last 10 years is to see that because of that, there is an emerging cohort of patient leaders like Lindsey and I and one of our friends in the US, Karen Anderson, who are stepping up to provide national patient leadership to make a difference to other patients and to the disease. And historically, it's been clinicians who've been running most of those initiatives. And to see patients emerging and starting to talk about their perspectives on the disease and what they need from the healthcare system is going to help the system to evolve to better meet the needs of patients. So it's a really exciting time, I think, globally, to see that happening.
Yeah, I think one of the things I first noticed when I first kind of linked up yourself, Gareth, in the Think Aorta campaign and the wider patient charity, well, I was amazed at actually how much good work was being done by a patient collective, effectively. As you said, like clinicians often, and like, your surgeons, your doctors, they often would be the ones historically pushing for improvements in, a diagnosis or surgery. And actually I was amazed by, these groups of people who had shared experience, or lived real experience. Some of it is obviously quite traumatic experience as well, isn't it? It's not, not always success stories, but actually how that group united and were making big movements, what I think was really, really unique, I think, within healthcare.
Yeah, it has been. It's been a really interesting journey to see what empowered patients can do. So a lot of clinicians were sort of, what can patients with a serious disease like aortic dissection, what can they actually do? And our response is just watch us. And then you'll see there are a few clinicians out there who still take the view that, patients shouldn't be leading initiatives like this and challenging the healthcare system. But I think most people realise how important it is to listen to patients in the modern healthcare environment and partner with them to improve care. So most of the time we're pushing on an open door. And you're right. I mean, we started ADONS UK and Ireland in 2015. So we're 9 years on now. And I have to pinch myself sometimes when I look back at everything we've managed to achieve using just patients as resources, partnered with the medical community. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I think those people who may have resistance, I think the main thing for me being on the other side as a clinician is probably we have to remember why we're all here. It's for the patients. The healthcare system was for the patients. It is for the patients. So I think that as much as, we do our training and we want to develop and progress and progress our fields, it's only to benefit patients. And that's what I think sometimes can be lost in some medical education and obviously like healthcare education. So I think, that's why I love doing work with people like yourself, Gareth and Lindsey, is because obviously by doing it in a collaborative way, we can have by far greater impact, can't we?
Definitely. Yeah. We're stronger together.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd quite like to, if it's okay, is to get a bit of history in terms of your own experience with dissection. Obviously, you've already said you both have Marfans, but maybe if we start with yourself, Gareth, and then we'll move on to you, Lindsey, about actually just your own personal experience with dissection. So, Gareth, over to you.
Sure. Okay. So this is the point where I say I wish I was Lindsey, because the difference between us is I was diagnosed with Marfan's as a child. My father died of an acute dissection at the age of 49 when I was 11 years old. And I was surrounded by doctors saying, oh, you've got this genetic condition and this could happen to you. And indeed it did. I had the same dissection as Dad at the same age. So the condition completely replicated itself. And it was an acute dissection, even though I'd had 30 years of annual cardiology surveillance to look at my aorta. And the reason I'd like to be like Lindsey is that she's had the opposite experience, which I'm sure she'll talk about, of actually having the surveillance and having elective intervention to prevent the aorta dissecting. So what happened to me was I had annual cardiology. And early on with Marfan's, because Marfan's is not just an aortic disease, early on with Marfan's, other things are more important than the aorta in terms of you living your life. So when I was a teenager, it was musculoskeletal issues preventing me playing sport. I went to a rugby playing school in Wales, and I was very frustrated about not being allowed to play rugby and this kind of things. Then I wanted to join the Royal Air Force, and I had eye issues to do with my Marfan's. My lenses were out of place. I had terrible vision. They used to call me milk bottle bottoms at school because of how thick my glasses were.
Like the old-fashioned glasses where they're like super thick.
NHS specs with a centimetre thick glass in them, giving me a plus 13.5 magnification. That's how I got about.
Yeah.
So the eyes were a big issue. And of course, Gareth wanted to join the Air Force as a pilot.
Yeah.
That was never going to happen.
It's a tough match up then, isn't it?
So when we went to the careers office, had the medical, no chance the Royal Air Force wasn't going to look at me with Marfan syndrome. So eyes and joints were kind of important. And it was only when I was at university, I did medical physics at university, and my final year project was to make a phonocardiograph, which is a device that listens to your heart sounds. And I designed and built this thing, and I was doing it for a lecturer in the physiology department, and I tested it out by putting the microphone on my chest with an elastic strap and going on the treadmill and seeing what I got. And I showed the results to the lecturer, and he said, well, this is fantastic. But he said, who did you get this from? I said, well, it came off the machine that I designed and built. He said, but who was it attached to when you did it? I said, well, me. He said, you need to go and see a doctor, Gareth. preferably a cardiologist. And what I'd done on this phonocardiograph was I'd picked up the sound of my mitral valve prolapse.
Oh, okay.
Most people in Marfan's have a mitral valve prolapse, and there it was. Nobody had ever heard it with a stethoscope, but it was clear as anything on the phonocardiograph. So that was the beginning at the age of 21 of annual cardiology follow-up.
Yeah.
So I went to cardiology. I had an echo, which said my aorta was fine, my aortic valve was fine, saw the floppy mitral valve and said, well, it's mild, it's not causing you a problem, we'll just keep an eye on it. And every year I would go back to cardiology and have that surveillance. When I was 41, so 20 years later, out of the blue, I had a heart attack. And I ended up in hospital. It was what's called an NSTEMI, a non-ST elevated MI. If you know, for the clinicians watching. And, I had an angiogram, and basically my arteries were clear. I had no coronary heart disease. I was very lucky not to have too much heart muscle damage. So I left hospital, did the cardiac rehab, got put on the gold standard drugs, and went back to work, got on with my life, really. And nobody really understood where that came from, but it was one of those things that can happen to Marfan's people. So I kind of got over that and started working very hard in a senior job in the city, flying around the world and just loving it, really. I had a really good work and life. I've got 3 children. So living in North Yorkshire, working in the city 3 days a week, flying around the world 1 or 2 weeks a month, so that was my life. And suddenly one night in London, I collapsed in the pub with an acute type B aortic dissection from my left subclavian artery here in the shoulder all the way down into my iliac arteries that feed the blood to both legs. And that had arisen because I had a 6 centimeter aneurysm just beyond the left subclavian artery, which nobody had ever seen on my annual surveillance. And the reason they'd not seen it is they'd been doing an echo, which can only visualize the ascending aorta and a bit of the arch. And in the 30 years, I'd never had a CT or an MRI of my whole aorta. So if I had, then probably I would have been a candidate for elective surgery like Lindsey was, and the dissection could have been prevented. So that was my dissection journey up to that point when I dissected in the pub. My good fortune was, although I live in a village in North Yorkshire, I dissected in a pub a mile from the best aortic centre in the UK, Bart's Heart Centre. And it was there that I had the surgery that saved my life. And I was kind of 3 months living in London while we prepped for the surgery and planned what to do, had the surgery and then recovered afterwards. And my team of Professor Rakesh Uppal and Mr. John Yap, I'd like to name check them, they operated on me on the 25th of May, 2016, and replaced my descending thoracic aorta in a huge operation and saved my life.
It is. It's incredible, really, when you hear your story. So, as a Welshman living in Yorkshire, to then happen to be in London, obviously, when you dissect, I think when we think about life moments, if you would have been in Yorkshire, for example, it could be the fact that you're 1 mile away in London from, as you said, like the best place you could possibly be compared to maybe if you were at home in Yorkshire. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure they got very good facilities, but actually, probably not the same scale as where you got your care in the end.
I think people say I've lived a charmed life, and I think that's very true. My father always used to say that I could fall into a heap of manure and come up smelling of roses. And certainly, fortune, fate, like whatever you believe, was with me that night that I dissected a mile from Bart's Heart Centre.
Yeah, it's like, even though it's obviously very distressing and obviously you've gone through this major moment, you couldn't be really in a better place in terms of only being a mile away. Exactly. So talk to me about actually what do you remember from that time then, being in the pub and obviously dissecting?
So because I was working flat out in a very demanding job, I knew that while I was in London, I needed to find something to do to make me relax. So I used to work in the city Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I found a choir that I could sing with on a Wednesday night. London City Voices, wonderful people. And we used to sing in the city straight after work on a Wednesday night, finish about 8 o'clock and go to the pub. And because there were 120 of us, we'd carry on singing in the pub because we'd just take the place over. So we used to have some wonderful Wednesday nights in the pub. And we were in the pub. It was about 9 o'clock. I was just chatting to some friends. I think we'd opened a bottle of wine between a few of us and just, having a really convivial evening. And it's suddenly, with no warning at all, I had this sudden onset chest pain. And I describe it like, It's like an invisible hand with long fingernails had been plunged into my chest and was ripping down towards my groin. It was absolutely excruciating. Never had pain like it before. And so my legs gave way.
So you kind of collapsed at that moment?
Well,
then,
I sort of folded. I was standing next to a booth in the pub.
Yeah.
And I sort of folded into the booth because I felt my legs couldn't support me anymore.
Yeah. The strength had gone to support
The
you.
strength had gone, the balance had gone. I think maybe the blood flow had altered and the legs were not supporting me very well. So I kind of folded into a heap into this booth, and there was a bench opposite. And because the pain and the ripping was so bad, I put my feet up on the bench opposite, and instinctively I pushed to try and stop this ripping sensation. And I know that was my aorta dissecting down to my groin. Nothing did any good. Because I'd had a heart attack, I had a GTN spray.
Yeah.
So my first thought was, I better take a few puffs of GTN. Did that. And all that did was give me a cracking headache. Which it normally does.
Yeah.
But didn't do anything for the
classic
pain.
GTN headache.
Yes. So I turned to my mate and I said, call 999, tell them I've got Marfan Syndrome and I think I'm having an aortic dissection. Because in my mind, I felt like I was dying. It was that sense of impending doom.
Yeah. That severity as well, like to have that instinct of that this is serious, isn't it?
Yes. And I've never called 999 in my life for me before. Even when I had my heart attack, I got my wife to take me to hospital. So it was a big deal for me at the age of 50 to say, call 999.
Yeah.
Well, my mate called and I thought, this is what happened to Dad. That this is history repeating itself. I'm the same age. I've got the same thing. And I thought I was on my way out. So my friends made me comfortable. They moved me nearer to the door of the pub, lying on the floor with my back against the wall. So I was there. And very quickly, a couple of police officers arrived. And they came in and said, what's going on here? So I said, I think I've got Marfan Syndrome. I think I'm having an aortic dissection. And they had a defibrillator with them. And they said, well, we're not touching you then. You don't need the defib. We'll wait for the paramedics.
They're there if you're in cardiac arrest, aren't they, with a defib?
But very quick response. But paramedics were not far behind.
Yeah.
And they came in. And the things I remember, I was in a lot of pain, but the things I remember were talking to them about it and giving them a family history. They took quite a good family history about Marfan's and me and my dad. And I have a son who has Marfan's, and my dad's dissection. And you could see the pictures stacking up in their minds. And then they took a pain history. And said, what's the pain like? I was saying, well, it's 10 out of 10. It's ripping, tearing. Yeah. I was standing here having a chat and a drink, feeling perfectly well. And then all of a sudden, thunderclap.
Come on from nowhere.
Yeah. And they said, we think you're right. It probably is a dissection. And then there was a conversation about where should we go? And because in middle of the city of London, there were a few options, but they decided Major Trauma Centre was the place to go because Barts doesn't have an A&E.
No.
So they said, we'll take you to the Royal London Major Trauma Centre. There's vascular surgery there as well, and we'll see how we go from there. So they said, anybody want to come with him? I'm just in the pub with my friends.
Yeah.
And my dear friend Ali, who is one of the Sopranos, immediately just said, I'll come, jumped in the back of the ambulance. And we both thought I was dying. And so the paramedics gave me some morphine for the pain. And I said to them, before you do that, let me ring my daughter, who was the only member of the family in London. She was studying in London.
Okay.
And I rang her about 10 o'clock on the Wednesday night. She was just on her way home from a concert in Waterloo. And I said, I'm going to the A&E of the Royal London. Can you come and meet me? Because I'm in a bad way. So she redirected herself. And off we went to the Royal London with Ali and me and the paramedics. They pre-alerted. So I was met at the Royal London by the ED team who were ready for a dissection.
Yeah.
So they took me straight into resus. And I was also met very quickly afterwards by the on-call consultant vascular surgeon who said, well, if this is a dissection, we need a CT scan. So within 30 minutes of arriving in the Royal London, I was in the CT scanner and I remember somebody behind the screen saying, extensive aortic dissection, aggressive blood pressure lowering, let's get the labetalol up.
Yeah.
And this surgeon said to me, Sandip Sarkar said to me, he said, you're right, you have got an extensive dissection. And we had an interesting moment, Sandip and I, because I said to him, okay, I said, my dad had this, came to hospital in an ambulance at the same age. I said, he lived a few days and then he went. I said, let's be honest, I've got a few days, have I? Because that's how I felt. I felt, this is history repeating myself. I'm going to check out here. And Sandip, to his credit, said to me, maybe. He said, you've got a very serious life-threatening illness.
Yeah.
He said,
at least he was honest, wasn't he, at that time?
Absolutely,
You know,
yeah.
the severity of the presentation in front of him. Yeah.
totally. He said, the next few days are really critical for you, but we can do some things now that we could not do when your dad dissected 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, actually. And he said, I've put the surgical team on standby. He said, it's a type B dissection, so we have got a bit of time. We need to see how you do in the next few days. Obviously, I now know that they were worried that it might go retrograde and become a type A dissection. So he put me into HDU with an invasive blood pressure monitor that was monitoring my blood pressure all the time.
Yep.
I was on a morphine PCI, so I could press a button and give myself pain relief when I needed. I was on lots of IV labetalol to try and control my blood pressure. And I spent the Easter weekend 2016 in the Royal London HDU like that, unable to get out of bed.
Yeah.
And when stand-up came back in on the Monday morning, he said, I've been worried about you, but you're still here. So I'm going to send you to Bart's, and they're going to plan how to intervene. He said, he drew me a little diagram, and he said, basically, you've got a huge aneurysm that's dissected just below your left subclavian artery in your chest, but you also have an abdominal aneurysm, and your dissection has gone all the way down through both aneurysms down into your iliacs.
Yeah.
He said, I think the surgical strategy will be to fix your chest first,
Yeah.
and then to fix your abdomen later. He said, Bart's Heart Centre will fix your chest. If you survive that and recover, you can come back here and I will support you through the abdominal surgery as a vascular surgeon. So that was that was the emergency scenario, really, and it was all a bit dramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds very dramatic, doesn't it, when you hear it? I think one thing, obviously having spoke to, like yourself, I've spoken to a lot of different patients with dissection. Yours is almost quite an optimal story in terms of patient care. Though you got that CT within 30 minutes. You're obviously 1 mile out from that facility that can help you.
Yeah.
Not everyone probably experiences, and you would know more than me, but actually having spoken to a lot of people involved with charity, we hear quite different stories, don't we, compared to maybe your journey.
I call it the happy path, Simon.
Yeah.
If there's such a thing as a happy path in acute aortic dissection, I was fortunate enough to experience it.
Yeah.
I knew what was going on. There was awareness of what was happening around the time it happened. I had paramedics who listened to me. I went straight to a major trauma centre that had been pre-alerted, and the ED were fantastic. And then I had my surgery at the best aortic centre in the UK, and I had gold standard treatment from leading experts. I mean, Bart's does, I think Ongu was telling me recently, they do 95 dissections a year.
Yeah.
So if there is such a thing as a happy path, I had it.
Yeah.
But we know that most people don't get access to that level of care. There's, we know that most people who have a dissection still die.
Yeah.
But of those who make it to hospital, there is still a tale of misdiagnosis and delay, and consequently less than optimal surgical outcomes. And this is why I do what I do.
Yeah.
Because it's not fair that I should get access to the happy path when the majority of patients in this country don't. That's a healthcare inequality.
Yes, very much so, yeah.
I'm not a special person. I don't deserve to have had that special pathway. And we've got to level this up so that other people get the same care that I was fortunate enough to receive.
Yeah, even going from your own story, obviously for where you were, location, the paramedics, the police turning up, your route to ED, there's so many opportunities in your own personal story where things could have gone different, couldn't they? I think I've definitely spoken to patients and relatives who maybe with the paramedics have not quite listened to what they were saying, in terms of like you were saying you had Marfans and you think it's dissection. Actually, sometimes we find that actually people can be quite dismissive when patients kind of self-diagnose.
Yes.
And so that could have gone horribly wrong, couldn't it, as well? And then, as you said, you've had very much the happy pathway in what is a really serious condition, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I mean, nobody comes to work as a healthcare professional, intending to miss this. No. But I think there's a lot of old thinking and a lot of wrong thinking about the condition instilled into healthcare professionals, particularly if they've been around since the 20th century and did the training when everybody was dying, I've got a friend who's also got Marfan's. He had a type A dissection in his 40s, and his wife called an ambulance. And the ambulance came out and said, no, this is just musculoskeletal, and refused to take him to hospital.
Yeah.
And it was only when his wife put him in the car and took him to hospital that he was then put into emergency surgery for a type A dissection. And I think, that's completely opposite to my experience.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work to do just to provide the information and the education to ensure that everybody has the right level of awareness of the disease and can behave in the right way for these patients. And that's what Think Aorta is about.
Yeah, it's raising that standard across the board, isn't it? Okay.
Definitely.
So, Lindsey, I'd like to come to you now, if it's okay. So, obviously, Gareth talked us about his kind of like acute aortic dissection that he had. Can you tell us a bit about your story, Lindsey?
Yeah, so obviously, I have not had a dissection. So very luckily, so far, all good. But doesn't necessarily mean, my life has not been without some extreme challenges related to having Marfan syndrome. I have had 3 open heart surgeries. I'm 51 now. At 12, I had mitral valve repair. I've had extensive spinal fusion multiple times over the years. I've had extreme amounts of eye surgery, lost the vision in one eye completely, struggles with the other one. All of the complications related to Marfan syndromes, I have. I'm kind of like the poster girl for all the things you can get.
If Marfan's had a poster.
It would be me. But what's also interesting is that, you have to remember something like Marfan is a syndrome. So there's lots of people who have very mild symptoms and don't really present and they're not diagnosed until they have an emergency visit with an aortic dissection. On the flip side, you've got people like me who've lived with knowing that I have this risk my whole life. I was very, monitored my whole life. I had my aortic root repaired at 28, an aortic mechanical valve implanted because they were not able to save my aortic valve, and had another surgery a year later. I've been on warfarin for 25 years. My last surgery for cardiac was 25 years ago. And so now at 25 years on, unfortunately, I've also had a stroke related to subtherapeutic INR 9 years ago, which obviously not something you want to have, but warfarin is, it's a challenge. So at this age, though, it's this whole concept, and I know we're going to talk about it a bit more, is about fear, because living with knowing that it haven't happened to me. I hope it never happens to me. I obviously am scanned all the way down every year. I go to have my cardiac checkups. I have either a CT or an MRI. My echo, they even go all the way down into my ascending, and they've been doing that for 20 years. I know all my numbers. You know what I mean? I'm on all of that, but there always is this underlying fear that, because I have unusual tissues, obviously because I have Marfan, is it just going to tear anyway? Does it? Because not everybody has an aneurysm first. There's the other part.
Yeah.
And then you guys were talking about, not being believed. I look very well. Obviously, we're at a certain age. We show up, if I all of a sudden think I'm having a dissection, I want my paramedic to be like, oh yeah, okay, you've got Marfan syndrome. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're probably having a dissection, blue light, off you go. Yeah. But I, unfortunately, and like Gareth, I've had friends of mine who are no longer with us, who were quite young, were not, they flagged it, but they, you know what I mean? There was a doubt. They're like, oh, well, you don't look like you have Marfan syndrome. You know what I mean? It's very much, even with a diagnosis, it's not a fault, you know what I mean? It doesn't make you just safe from everything. It doesn't work like that. No. And our system doesn't work like that. We're fallible. We're all human beings. So I do really think that the living with risk and fear is a big part of our lives as people with, known genetic disorders, as well as people who've had previous dissections. And now they realize that they have this vulnerability and they have to live with it. So that's sort of why, that's why, we talk about this stuff, because understanding how it affects you, it doesn't just affect you physically, it affects you mentally, as, we've discussed. And it does affect how you live your life. And giving people, the sort of, I don't know, it's not so much optimism, but just the sort of the awareness, enough awareness to know how to carry on is incredibly important.
Yeah, so obviously one of the terms we often use is like health anxiety, isn't it? Around your long-term kind of condition. How does your health anxiety, Lindsey, then impact you kind of day to day? Do you kind of notice it day to day, or is it more like kind of peaks or?
No, it's interesting. It doesn't affect me on, I'm not thinking about it when I'm doing other things. No. When it does really come up now at this point, because I've got many, many complications. And as I said, I'm 25 years on my last cardiac event. So I'm like, I'm just waiting for it in a way.
It's like a big gap, isn't it?
Yeah, you kind of feel like, ooh, it's coming for me,
like, I'm due another one.
I'm due one, yes. You kind of have a little bit, there's just an awareness of that. It's also just more when other complications happen, like, COVID. Here's a prime example. Is that going to be, it's going to be more complicated. Is it going to, it put me into a full session of AFib for, a chunk of time. So, and then you're always concerned about, is it going to trigger other problems because of the complications related to our tissues being unusual, aortic disease on top of that. So that's, it's more when things aren't all 100% stable everywhere. Yeah, I think any little thing sometimes can tip you further over than you would normally when 30 years ago, I probably wouldn't have worried that much. But now I'll be a bit more like, that could be complicated for me. I've got to really pay attention. So, and the thing, people ask me all the time about travel, for example. Yeah. Just being, traveling with post-dissection, or even they know they're at risk. And sort of, I'm very much sort of like, you've got to live your life. You really, really need to still live your life, because if you're just living in fear and not going anywhere, you're not living. So that's a really big part of what I try to sort of promote and say, don't jump out of a plane anytime soon. Like not maybe a good idea.
On the flight over.
Exactly, on the flight over. But, and take, calculated risks in the sense that, if you can get decent health insurance, make sure you have it. And I know even that it's its own challenge as you get older, but it shouldn't stop you from living and experiencing life. Because if what it does teach you is that, it's short and it can happen at any time. So you need to get on with it, right? I think that that's what's so positive about Think Aorta. As much as it's about, let's identify these people so that they get saved, that's actually the point. It's so that they're here. And then they have a chance to live a good life. Yeah.
And it's all, as you said, what I like there is it's the quality of life, isn't it?
It's quality.
It is, anyone who has a dissection, or obviously has got Marfan's, has got ongoing kind of health conditions, can survive. But actually, if it then overtakes their life to a degree that actually they're not leaving the house because they're scared of obviously what might happen. And because I think actually on a previous episode, Tony talked about a bit about not wanting to go out and things like that because of the worry. Yeah. And actually, it's a fine line, isn't it? Between actually, I think the quality is the key word, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I really like your approach to that. It's a really nice mindset, I think, for maybe other listeners who maybe have Marfan's or who've had a dissection and obviously are now looking at the next stage of their life. It's probably one of the key things, isn't it, about having the quality, being mindful, as you said, not jumping out of planes, and maybe extreme sports might be off the table for a while. But I think quality is key.
It's really important to be mindful, and I take great care of myself. I'm not, I'm not saying ignore it and just do what you want. It's the in between. It's the just a balance between taking good care of your, because you've obviously got more healthcare related work to do. It does sometimes become a full-time job at periods to take care of yourself well, and all the scans and all the different things that we have to do. But it's not this burden that can't be managed. And I think the most resilient people that I know are people who, a lot of people who have these chronic conditions or have had something like an aortic dissection, because they learn skills that they didn't know they had. And those skills take them a long way, going forward.
Yeah, I think that quality of life is really important. I mean, one of the things that Lindsey and I are is examples of the fact that it's possible to live a very successful and fulfilled life with Marfan syndrome. Even if you're getting hit by these acute events every so often, and I have one of my 3 children has Marfan Syndrome, and I'm constantly saying that to him, which is, this is not something that should inhibit. It'll limit you. You'll need to look after yourself, but it's perfectly possible to live a very successful and very fulfilled life with Marfan's, and that wasn't always true. So when I was diagnosed at the age of 11, I remember the doctors gathering around and telling me you had Marfan's and saying, according to the literature, your life expectancy is 32 plus or minus 16 years. And I was kind of mathematically minded, so I understood what that meant.
Yeah.
And I thought, blimey, that means, I'm going to pass of an aortic dissection probably by the time I'm 50 at the latest. And so I had to work out a plan for my life that took account of that.
Yeah.
And as Lindsey says, you go for it. You do the things you want to do. So I got married relatively early, had children relatively early, cracked on with my career and looked for the opportunities I wanted to do, because that was my mindset, which is I'm going to pop my clogs of a dissection some point before my 50th birthday. So it changes that was the only thing that I would term health anxiety in my mind at that point in time.
Yeah.
But I turned it into something that just governed the way I led my life.
You flipped yours, didn't you? Because it's actually quite rare in life. Like no one will give you the date of your passing all day, for example. So actually, if someone's almost giving you a rough timeline, you can take that one or two ways. You could really let that cripple you, or you can say, okay, this is what, instead of your 5-year plan, you've literally got your 40-year plan, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a level of uncertainty. So I felt that, okay, I know what the risk is. So I need to develop a strategy to cope with that risk.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. But interestingly, just to demonstrate how things have changed, because I do want to be encouraging to other people who've got a genetic aortic disease.
Yeah.
Because here we are in our 50s saying life is great, okay? Despite all the health challenges. But my very dear friend, Dr. Anne Child, who's the medical director of the Marfan Trust, she was the first person I phoned when I ended up in the Royal London Hospital with a dissection to say, what do I do now, Anne? And she always says that 30 years of research have added 30 years to the life expectancy of Marfan's patients. So now the literature says that with Marfan's, you can live, with the right medical care, you can live a normal lifespan.
Yeah.
And that's the difference that's taken place over the last 30 years. And part of Think Aorta is getting everybody up to speed to that. But that's an incredibly positive message for people with this diagnosis now, which is if you take care of yourself and you get access to the care that is now available, you can live a normal lifespan with these diseases and have a really good quality of life.